that they've been sequestered at the hotel, and that's where they came up with the verdict?
We believe so. That's what they have been sequestered for the evenings at a hotel. They could come and talk to their families and communicate, but they were deliberating very late last night. And the assumption is that they are being transported to the courthouse during some part of this. Remember, you were able to hand over notes through Zoom because they didn't want to bring the defendant, the counsel, everyone in. The jury never goes in the room to actually hand over the question to the judge. It's always sort of done in this distance way to give them their.
So what's going to happen once they are brought back, or whether they're now or not, when they actually are back in the courtroom, what happens?
They're going to sit in the jury box the way they have been through the entire trial. The foreman will hand the jury verdict to the judge, who will then review it quickly, ask if they've all been able to lead to a unanimous verdict, which has to happen, in Minnesota. It must be unanimous.
At this stage, does the judge already know what the verdict is?
Yeah, usually the judge gets a look in advance. He knows what's coming. He will ask the foreperson of the jury, count one, how do you find? Guilty or not guilty? The foreperson will read the verdict. We'll do that times 3. And
sentencing will take place before the actual time the judge says, here is the number of anything. We in America have changed this over the course of time to say it's not just a pipeline to prison post-conviction, it's about how we can rehabilitate offenders as well.
Van Jones, obviously people are listening very closely to, is it going to be conviction on all counts? Will it be? How much does that matter in terms of the public's response? I think it matters a lot. I think, obviously if there's an acquittal, it's completely devastating. But if it's just the lower one, he's negligent, that didn't feel negligent. That didn't look like negligence. And so I do think that it matters. If it's all 3, I think you're going to feel a level of vindication for this movement and for this community. And don't forget, this is not the only case in that area. I've talked to people on the ground there. What you have to understand about this, where this is happening, it's the most livable place, and it also has the biggest disparities. In other words, it's a great place to be white, and it's a terrible place to be black. That's what everybody tells me. And they say the level of friction between the Hmong community there, the Somali community there, the black community there, and the police is unreal. They say they feel like they're in a war zone all the time. Then you bring in all these troops. You have a grieving community that's already traumatized, and now you have police and troops everywhere. So they are literally just on pins and needles. If you have a complete vindication of what all these grassroots groups have been saying, then there's relief. But if you come back with just one charge, and then if the sentencing guidelines give you, a couple of years, it's going to be putting salt in a very big wound.
Chief Ramsey, we have several hours now or time where we are awaiting this verdict. Law enforcement also has time to try to figure out, obviously they have been going over contingency plans for quite some time.
Well, they have been going over plans. I mean, you have to be prepared whether there's an acquittal or whether there's a conviction, because you're going to have in many cities people take to the streets, either in celebration or because they're upset because of the verdict. You have to be ready no matter what. Unfortunately, they have some experience because in May, with the killing of George Floyd, there was a lot of unrest. And so many of the areas where you had unrest, you're going to already have your platoons out there to be able to protect strip malls and different places like that where you're likely to have some issues. And you want to be able to have people just celebrate and express their First Amendment rights at the same time. So you got to have that balance there. And I think right now that's what's been taking place. There's been a lot of preparation. There's been a lot of conference calls between major city chiefs, conference of mayors, IACP and PERF, talking about the things that went bad in May, so we don't repeat the same mistakes in May, and that's important.
But you know, you also do have on the other side of it, you've got to try to have some public order and some safety, but you also had 50 grassroots organizations begging, saying you have now too much police presence on us. You got these Humvees, you have all this stuff, and the young people feel that they are being pushed up against the wall. They need the space to grieve. They need the space to celebrate, and they need the space to be able to do it the right way. And so sometimes, you know, you're in a tough situation if you're local government there, because if you don't have enough presence, you're going to get in trouble, but you can also overdo it. And so what my hope is that you have, let me just give some praise to some of these groups, Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, Minnesota Youth Collective, Take Action Minnesota, ACER, Movement Voter Project. Those young people have been out there when the cameras were there and when they weren't, keeping this movement going. They need space to protest tonight safely or to celebrate tonight safely. I hope they get it.
What's concerning, though, is we have a Pavlovian response in America that when we have impending verdicts and you see buildings start to be boarded up and businesses start to close, that trust gap that's already there between our justice system and members of the community, it expands exponentially. Because in their minds, they say, you're preparing me for an acquittal. You are telling me if it's boarded up, you anticipate my unrest, my wrath, you anticipate the devolution of a protest into looting and other things. And so part of what you're seeing in terms of the unease you're speaking about, Van, is that Pavlovian reflex and response to say, what does this mean if you are calling out the National Guard? People believe, did you get a heads up, Governor? Did you get a heads up, Mr. President? Did you get a heads up, Judge? Do you know something that we do not know? And finally, on the point that you raised, Van, about the difference between how people will compare and what negligence looks like, Minnesota has a very specific and recent memory of what second-degree charges look like, second-degree manslaughter, because Geronimo Jimenez, who killed Philando Castile, charged and acquitted with the second-degree manslaughter charge. Does that feel the same way for George Floyd to people? You have the officer, now resigned, Kim Potter, who killed Dante Wright. Same charge. Does that feel the same way of that 9 minutes and 29 seconds? And so you've got a population of people, human beings, who are saying, well, if I'm going to compare, this doesn't feel like those cases. And if that's all he gets, this is going to be something that might contribute to that trust gap widening.
Let's go back to, real quick, if I can just respond to something Van said. One of the things that was discussed is not having a heavy-handed approach immediately. If you need to have people in riot gear and so forth, have them out of sight. Stage them someplace out of sight. They can respond quickly. You start off as low a level as you can.
Let's go back to Jake.
Thank you, Anderson. We are standing by for the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial to be announced any minute. I'm going to hand it over to CNN's Wolf Blitzer right now. Wolf.
Jake, thanks very much. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're picking up our special coverage of the Chauvin trial. Verdict expected momentarily. Joining us, Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon. I want to go to Sarah Seidner first. She's on the scene for us in Minneapolis. She's right at the courthouse where we expect this verdict fairly soon, right, Sarah? Looks like we have to reconnect with Sarah Seidner. We're going to try to reconnect with her momentarily. We're also watching all of this unfold with Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper. Let me bring in Don Lemon right now. Don, you got some thoughts on what we can anticipate?
I do have some thoughts, Wolf, and just so you know, I've been in communication with Ben Crump, the family attorney, and I asked him, I said, what can I say right now? Are you optimistic? Are you cautious? Who is with you? What's the mood? Where are you? And he said, Phalonis and I are in the courthouse. He said, the family has faith that Derek Chauvin will be found criminally liable for killing George Floyd. And again, that's from Ben Crump, the family attorney. And as has been reported earlier, that Phalonis Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, is going to be in the courtroom when the verdict is read, and he is there now with the family attorney and the family. I would imagine it together, and they are cautiously optimistic that considering the time that it took the jury to deliberate, Wolf, and come up with a verdict that is going to be at least in their favor. Not exactly sure how they're going to rule on all the charges, but there you go. That is the latest from the family and the attorney, Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah, we're going to be checking back with them all the time. Sarah Seidner, we just managed to reconnect with you, Sarah. First of all, tell us where you are and tell us what you're seeing.
All right, so we are right across the street from the Hennepin County Government Center where the court is. We know that George Floyd's brother, Philonis Floyd, is inside of the court. We know that we have our reporter inside of the court as well, Josh Campbell. He is there to listen to the jury read the verdict. We are awaiting. We know that Derek Chauvin is inside the court as well. Chauvin went in about 8 minutes past 3 local time, so 4:08 your time. And so everyone is waiting for the jury to come in. And everyone is waiting to hear from the foreperson as to what their decision is. I'll give you an idea of where we're standing. If you look to my right, there is a train and the edge of where everything is blocked off around the courthouse. If you look at the little gate that's there, that's where a lot of folks have been brought into the court, in and out of the court in cars. And then if you look to my left, you will see a little grassy knoll there, and just beyond that, there are dozens of people that have gathered, some of whom knew George Floyd well, and who are here to speak their piece. And we do know that the family will be speaking within an hour after the verdict is read. We also know that we heard from Philonis Floyd just before he went into court. He said he was pacing, that he has been patient, but he was pacing right before he went in. He said, "Look, I am hoping that this verdict helps me finally get some sleep, because since May 25th, 2020, he hasn't really been able to sleep well at night. It has been extremely difficult for this family. It has been extremely difficult for this community. Whether you are a resident here, a business owner here, an official here, there have been a lot of very emotional folks around, and those emotions are at their height at this moment. There are folks that are already in tears. There are folks that are worried about what this jury is going to do. And so you also have another case not too far from here, a few miles from here, where another black man, unarmed, was shot and killed by police in Brooklyn Center. And so the combination of all that makes for a very, very tense scene. And it is why, and I'll give you a look, the media is, of course, here from around the world. This building is the Star Tribune building, which is one of the newspapers here, the newspaper here. And you can see it's boarded up as well as almost every single other building downtown here and around other parts of the city as well, including near George Floyd Square, where dozens of people have already gathered there too. Wolf.
We're going to stay in very close touch with you, Sarah. I want to bring in Omar Jimenez. He's also on the scene for us. Omar, tell us where you are and what you're seeing.
Right now, Wolf, we are at George Floyd Square. This is ground zero for where George Floyd's final moment.
All right, hold on, Omar. This is the judge, the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill.
All rise for the jury. All right, please be seated. Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. we the jury in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We the jury in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer your questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now, we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
Move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further? All right. Thank you. We're adjourned.
So there you have it, less than 10 minutes, guilty on all 3 counts, guilty second-degree murder, guilty third-degree murder, guilty second-degree manslaughter. You saw the former police officer there, Derek Chauvin, handcuffed. He's going back into jail. He was out of jail on bail, awaiting these verdicts. Guilty on all 3 counts. Let's get immediate reaction from Don Lemon. Don, you're watching this as closely as anyone.
Justice has been served. And you can see the reaction from the crowd, how America feels. And I'm sure people who are watching all over this country, or watching all over the world, are on their devices getting messages from people, as I am, saying, thank you, Jesus. Thank God. Finally, justice on all counts. The attorney for the Crump family has reached out and given me a statement, Wolf, and he says, guilty. Painfully earned justice has finally arrived for George Floyd's family. This verdict is a turning point in history and sends a clear message on the need for accountability of law enforcement. Justice for Black America is justice for all America. We thank Minnesota AG Keith Ellison and his team, along with our legal team, for fierce dedication to justice for George. But it does not end here. We still have work to do. We have to make the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act become law so we can hold law enforcement accountable and prevent so many of these unjustified killings of marginalized people of color. This reminds me in so many ways, and it's not specific, but it reminds me of the tension and the passion and the angst that was felt during the reading of O.J. Simpson. People on the street hugging each other people were just beside themselves. But remanded into custody, the verdict spoke for itself. And if that didn't speak for itself, Wolf, a police officer who had been on the job for years, a training officer, handcuffed and led away. And the next place for him, the next home for him, will be prison.
You know, Don, this is a powerful moment in American history that we're watching unfold right now. Anderson, guilty on all 3 counts, second-degree murder, potentially up to 40 years. We don't know if he'll get that. Third-degree murder, guilty, 25 years, maximum sentence. Second-degree manslaughter, guilty, maximum sentence, 10 years. Don't know if he's going to get all that, but he's going to jail right now for potentially a very long time.
Yeah, and just for our viewers who are watching, on the left-hand side of your screen in the lower corner, what you're seeing is that is the location where George Floyd was murdered. That is where Derek Chauvin killed, murdered George Floyd. On the right-hand side of your screen is outside the courthouse where we were seeing George Floyd's girlfriend. Van Jones, your response to your reaction to this verdict?
Well, you know, one down, many, many more to go. But I think about that young girl who brought out her cell phone and who stood there in horror, not knowing what to do, but just holding that phone steady. She did the right thing. All those community members who came and begged and pleaded and talked, they did the right thing. That EMT person did the right thing. When people called the police on the police, they did the right thing. When the police chief fired this man, he did the right thing. When people marched by the millions, they did the right thing. And part of what I think the message has to be is that we have to get more involved. It started with that young girl. She got involved. And then you had a community stand up, and you had a governor step in and take the case and give it to Keith Ellison to make sure that it was done the right way. This is the beginning of something. This is not the end of anything. This is the beginning of something. Where is Congress? They need to act. Those chokeholds are still legal according to federal government. That needs to change. There's no duty to intervene from the federal government. That needs to change. There's no registry for cops like Chauvin. That needs to change. You know, when you have somebody like, Representative Karen Bass and Tim Scott fighting, we need to get behind them. This should never happen again. One down, many more to go. Sometimes when we fight, we lose, but sometimes when we fight, we won. The people won.
When you saw Derek Chauvin putting his hands behind his back, being handcuffed and let out of the court, what did you think?
Justice. I've seen so many kids who've done so much less than him walk out of courtrooms in handcuffs with much less evidence. I've seen kids do 20 years, 30 years on snitch evidence. Just one kid testify against another kid and go away to prison. You don't have TV cameras and body cameras and cell phones. So many young people from that community sitting in prison and cops getting away with murder over and over again. That's what justice looks like. When people break it, all we want is the police to obey the law. We're not asking for anything but that, for the police to obey the law. And when they break the law, they should have handcuffs just like anybody else. We don't want them to be below us or beneath us. They should obey the law. That is what justice looks like.
Do you worry some people are going to see this and say, okay, that's good, it's done, it's over?
It took too long. It took too long. It took too much marching. It took too much. It took too many tears. And it was too close. And I don't care who you are. This morning you woke up afraid to hope. You were scared to hope. Even with all the evidence you saw, you were scared to hope this morning. That tells you we need real change. Laura?
You know, these bystanders we heard in the prosecution's closing, they bore witness to what was happening. They felt powerless. They felt guilt. They felt remorse that they could not do more. And I remember that 18-year-old who had the wherewithal and the fortitude to hold America's eyes to what was going on and said, I spent nights being guilty, apologizing to George Floyd. And then I realized it's not what I should have done. It's what you should have done, talking to the officer who was standing there in that courtroom. And the idea here that here we are going from a feeling of powerless to having it handed over to the jury for them to now assign guilt to somebody who was not a part of the noble profession of police officers, that was acting under the color of law because he could. And how dare anyone question my ability to keep my knee on the neck of a man for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. This is a profound moment of justice, but it's also one, as Van talks about, I look ahead to what justice actually means in a definitive and holistic sense. This is but a start, but at least now I can answer my son's question when he says, Mommy, what if that happened to me? I can at least show him what justice looked like today.
I want to go to Sarah Seidner. Sarah, explain where you are, what you're seeing.
Go to the sidewalk. Let's go to the sidewalk.
Sarah Seidner, she's getting back into position. We'll go back. We'll go back to her very shortly. Laura, just in terms of what happens now, sentencing now is several weeks away.
It is. And first what happens, as they said, you'll have what they call the Blakely factors, the idea of those aggravating factors. What that means is the judge will now decide whether the idea of it happening in front of a child, we know as young as 9 years old, the idea of George Floyd being particularly vulnerable in the position, the idea of the power dynamic of an officer to a civilian, the judge will now assess those aggravating factors. You will also have the notion of what's called the PSI. These are the pre-sentencing report, essentially. And what that is to show the different, they call them crimogenic factors that say, what's his remorse? What's his criminal history? If any, I suspect there's none. He's a police officer, or was after all. And the idea is about what would a holistic rehabilitation plan look like. Remember, he's not serving life in prison on any of these charges, so he will one day return to society. What will that look like when he does?
You know, Vin, the Lord
remember, he's not serving life in prison on any of these charges. He will one day return to society. What will that look like when he does?
All of us carry those cameras with us, but it really reminds so many people, it reminds us all that we can bear witness in our own lives. I'm not talking about videotaping things. I'm talking about bearing witness to the struggles of others, bearing witness to the pain, to the injustices that we see.
Yeah, and that was one of the most beautiful things that happened. If you in January, February 2020, if you'd ask probably the average white person, is police brutality a big deal? Is anti-racism a big deal? Then someone said yes, someone said no. Because of that young woman, and because of the video, 20 million white Americans marched, according to some, like millions. I didn't say thousands, millions. There were Black Lives Matter marches in Idaho when they ain't got no black people. That gives you a sense of how humanity's heart was touched. And so that shouldn't just happen in the streets when we're marching. There's so many opportunities, to your point, for us to do better. Listen, the empathy gap that we're seeing throughout our politics can start to close a little bit. Because don't forget, it's important for young people to understand this. The police chief fired the guy and testified against him. There were people throughout the profession of law enforcement who came forward and did the right thing for once. And guess what? All those people still have jobs, and Chauvin is in jail. So more cops can speak up, more police chiefs can speak up, and more people can do the right thing in these situations.
Chief, I want to go to Don Lyman. Don?
Anderson, thanks. And you know, Van, you're absolutely right, and so is Laura. Laura, we spoke earlier today, and we talked about the people who were standing there on the side of the street and filming this. And yes, they did feel helpless in the moment, but they didn't know their power then, but they certainly know their power now. But I just want to add to, you know, when Van said that there's a lot more to be done. What there needs to be done, police officers around the country are going to have to do things. They are going to have to hold their fellow officers accountable. There are other officers who are involved in this particular incident. And in that moment, it doesn't seem that they held their fellow officers accountable. And with the Army lieutenant in Virginia, no one held that officer accountable as he was spraying the other officer and treating him in a way that was just demoralizing and disrespectful. So it's incumbent upon the citizens to hold these police officers accountable, but it's going to be incumbent upon the organizations and the fellow officers who are there every day with those officers who are not doing the right thing to hold them accountable. When it gets to the streets now. Go ahead.
No, I just want to bring in, you're talking about officers, I just want to bring in Chief Ramsey
Yeah.
onto to our conversation. Your perspective now when you see what's happened.
Well, first of all, this is the right verdict. And I go back to the closing arguments that the prosecution made the comment that this isn't an anti-police trial, it's a pro-police trial. And when I think about all the men and women that have been killed in the line of duty, serving others, when I think about the men and women out there right now serving honorably, this decision supports them. It doesn't harm them. You know, I've been in policing for more than 50 years, and I've seen the good side of it, but there is a dark side. And that's the side that Derek Chauvin and others like him, that's where they operate, is on that dark side. And light has to be shown there. And there has to be changes. There has to be reform. And I hope that this is a springboard toward really getting there, because we have a short attention span. We tend to deal with what's the issue of the moment and kind of, you know, quiet down a little bit. Then it comes back with something else. You can't afford to do that. I think the president's making a mistake by not taking the lead on police reform and saying, well, our Congress can't do much of anything right now. And so, you know, there needs to really be the leadership there. This is the moment. The moment is now. I'm proud that I spent 50 years in policing. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. But I also can't be blind to the fact that we've got people who have no business wearing a badge and a gun. And even in our training, we don't teach the history of policing. So young cops hit the street and wonder why they go in some neighborhoods and people look at them with suspicion and don't trust them. It's because of the history.
Really? They don't teach the history?
We don't. Some departments do, many don't. We don't teach people how to deal with power and authority. Can you imagine hiring some 21-year-old, give him a badge and a gun in a souped up car with lights and sirens and then wonder why you have problems? I mean, you know, we have to really look at our profession differently and bring the people in that can handle it in so many different ways. And so this is the moment, and there's a lot that can be done. I'm optimistic. I really am.
Chief, do you think that it makes a difference to have the police chief there and other officers testifying against a fellow officer in a trial that is this big, that has so much attention? You said a springboard. I think it's an inflection point, possibly.